Welcome to the X-Perts, your exceptional guides to all things X-Men. I am Jeremy.
I'm Joanna.
I am Jesse.
And we are doing this show in conjunction with Second Union. For the latest in entertainment headlines, please go to our website at wearesecondunion.com. Another year brings new opportunities and a lot more to talk about. This podcast is very much focusing on the X-Men, their storylines, their characters. In the first episode, we did a review of the lingering questions from the Dawn of X, of which there are many more than just the ones that we went in on. Mm-hmm. The second episode, we did an extremely deep dive into the history of Warren Worthington, the Angel, the Archangel, former Horseman of Death, and what we found out is he might have actually been through something more tragic than half the superheroes we actually know of.
Yeah.
You know, I realized when I was editing it, we didn't really dig into how badly Cameron Hodge messed up his life. And I don't mean just, the death of his girlfriend and managing to manipulate things so that Angel lost his wings. You guys didn't know that Cameron Hodge, when Angel decapitated him, you didn't know he came back.
Really?
The Right took his head and stuck it on this weird spidery-like machinery that's really hard to describe in simple terms. And he's been resurrected multiple times by mechanical means since then. And he stopped being a manipulator. He started being an overt sociopath after that.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So the character never really went away. I'm expecting him to be involved in some of these new post-human enemy groups that the X-Men are finding themselves adverse with. But we agreed that this week we're going to talk about a character that a lot of comic book fandom seems to think very negatively of, and that is Jubilee, a.k.a. Jubilation Lee. That is her real-life name in comic books.
Mm-hmm.
The character is relatively new when it comes to comic book storyline. She was created in 1989. She came out in Uncanny X-Men number 244. She is credited as being created by Chris Claremont and Mark Silvestri. And one thing that I was aware of, but I completely forgot about while I was doing research, is that did you know that when Jubilee was first introduced, she had an odd immunity to telepathy?
Really?
No.
It was something that was never really delved in, but when Jubilee was introduced, the X-Men were scattered in multiple places. The only group that was really together at this point were the Outback X-Men. This is the era where Dazzler, Havoc, and Longshot were part of the team. After that group of X-Men broke down, she was palling around with Wolverine for a while, and we will get into that. But during that period, she ran into several characters who tried to forcibly get into her head, and what they found out was they couldn't. For reasons that were never really explained and were later just never talked about again, in her early career, Jubilee just had this weird immunity to telepaths. No one could get into her skull.
Oh.
And it just kind of went away. Writers stopped talking about it.
Yeah, totally forgot about that.
I've often wondered if it had to do with her powers, considering she creates energy. I often thought if somehow that shifted her, the energy was just so deeply ingrained in her being that it made it difficult to get deep inside her psyche.
But, they never explain powers like that.
They generally don't, but did you... sometimes when you get into, real-world physics, it can help explain things that even comic books never adequately explain, like Shadowcat.
Mm-hmm.
Her ability to walk through walls, and one of those things that also was a side effect of her ability was that she would disrupt machinery and often destroy it. She was almost like a walking EMP for any electronic device she phased through, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that could be attributed to molecular polarity?
Sounds
Yes.
reasonable.
Yeah, in other words, when she's walking through something, she's not actually spacing out her molecules like it's often talked about. She may be changing the polarity of the objects she encounters as she walks through them so that her molecules can slide in between solid objects. It's the same physics that when a ping pong ball is repeatedly fired at a brick wall, eventually the polarity of the molecules of the ping pong ball shift just enough so that they match the wall, and that ping pong ball can occasionally rocket right through the wall.
Huh. I would like to see this on Mythbusters.
It's happened. There have been actual published studies where this has occurred.
Cool.
So, like I said, sometimes real-world physics can explain an odd thing, but we've gotten way off track already here. So, in 1989, this character was introduced to people, and she was introduced in kind of a one-shot issue where the women of this group of X-Men, Dazzler, Betsy Braddock melding with Quanon. Rogue, who at this point is being... her mind is asleep and her body's being moved by Carol Danvers. And Storm went on a girls' day out. They used the powers of a teleporter gateway to get from the Outback to a mall in the U.S. And this is where Jubilee started to follow them. Jubilee at this point was an orphan. She had been living on her own, and she had been stealing food and living in a particular mall, which these women X-Men happened to be in. She was originally in an orphanage because her parents were killed. Believe it or not, Jubilee before this was a talented gymnast who had the potential to go to the Olympic Games before her parents were killed by a pair of hitmen known as Reno and Molokai. This was relatively new news to me. I did not know their family ran afoul of assassins.
I didn't either. I just knew she was an orphan.
Yeah, I knew
Or
she was.
runaway.
I wasn't 100% sure she was 100% Chinese in that mix.
Oh no, she is Chinese.
Yeah.
But
I thought she was half.
no, she's Chinese. She's Chinese American, and she has a Japanese baby. But that's another story.
Okay.
But yeah, she was, after her parents died, she was sent to an orphanage. She ran away from the orphanage and hid in a Hollywood mall. Then she encountered the X-Men, but before she did that, her own mutant powers kicked in. And this is the ability that everyone generally knows, where she can generate something that she calls fireworks. They're small, explosive energy blasts that generally are created to blind and irritate. She was running away from mall security. And the stress of running away from security was the traumatic event that caused her powers to actually manifest. So she realized she could earn money by using her powers to entertain customers in the mall. So she was kind of a pseudo street performer at this point. I don't know why it took mall security so long to hear about someone creating fireworks in the middle of the mall every other day. You'd think they'd know that this person is around.
Because plot.
Right. So the mall hired what's known as M Squad. They consider themselves a company of mutant professional hunters similar to the original X-Force. Except they're idiots. No, they're actual humans. They are mutant hunters, but I mean, they call themselves M Squad. Just listening to that name, you know these are not complicated thinkers.
Sounds like a 90s thing.
Yeah. But the encounter between the women of the X-Men and M Squad is what made Jubilee curious enough to track them back to the portal that led them to the Outback, and she stepped through. So instead of just announcing herself to these mutants that she followed, she just hid out in the base the same way she hid out in the mall. You know, you gotta remember, Jubilee is an orphan who's been living on her own. She doesn't have news feeds or knowledge of any kind of current events, so she didn't even know what the X-Men were. She never heard the name before. But she also didn't know them, and considering her encounters with adults were generally negative, she didn't decide to just announce to everyone, hey, I've come back here, who are you? You know, she continues to steal food, she borrows clothes from a number of X-Men to make herself a pseudo-superhero costume, just kind of because she's bored. But she ends up being attacked by by a cybernetic dog. And this is the first time she uses her powers offensively, because she sprays this thing with more intense versions of her fireworks, and she manages to destroy it. This is the first time in comic books she uses her powers offensively. There have been later retcons so that she used her powers on a more destructive scale earlier, but of course this is one of those complications of comic book timelines versus real-world introductions of these things.
Yeah.
So while she's sneaking around the base, the X-Men have broken down. Wolverine has come back to the base by himself, but he was captured and tortured by the original owners of the Outback base they've appropriated. And those original owners are called the Reavers.
Oh.
These are anti-mutant, cybernetic hunters. And Jubilee doesn't know how to deal with it. She's dealt with people who are irritated to see her, but these are the first people she's encountered that are outright hostile to mutants. And she watches them torture Wolverine for several days. And while she has every capability to run away because nobody has detected her running around the base, she's just one of those empathic individuals that doesn't want to see another human being suffer. So during one of the breaks and torture sessions, Jubilee helps Wolverine back to the hiding spot she's arranged in the complex and tries to help nurse him back to health. And I know you're probably saying, this is Wolverine, how long did he really need? Well, he was nailed up to an X-shaped crucifix for a couple weeks.
Yeah, he'll need a few minutes.
Yeah, he needed a few days.
Yeah.
But before he's actually fully able to recover, the Reavers manage to hunt down where Wolverine is hiding, and they're aware that someone else is with him, so they have to escape. And they made their way via more conventional means to an island that it's easy to hide in, but it's not easy to feel safe in. And that island is called Madripoor.
Oh, fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Would you like an interesting little aside that I just found out in the last couple days?
Sure.
What's that?
Well, they're filming the new Disney Plus series, Falcon and Winter Soldier,
Mm-hmm.
with the characters from the MCU. They're building signs and sets, and some of them are marked with buildings that are well known as Madripoor.
Oh.
So it appears this may be the first time that the X-Men's universe and story is coming into the MCU is in this series.
Oh, that'd be cool.
But getting back to Jubilee's story, Jubilee and Wolverine do escape to Madripoor, but they end up on the wrong side of two individuals. One of them is actually a character that the X-Men are not used to dealing with. You know what? Rather than just tease it out, I'm going to tell you. It's the Mandarin.
Oh,
The classic
Really?
Iron Man enemy, 10 Rings of Power? Yes, the Mandarin.
Huh.
The other one is a warlord named Matsuo Surayaba. Surayaba. Matsuo Surayaba. And Matsuo Surayaba, at this point in time, is the person in charge of the Hand. Now, the Hand may be something that a lot of X-Men fans are not overly familiar with. Wolverine fans? Yeah, probably. The Hand are a group of ninjas. They're generally led by a different person, depending on which area you're talking about. But the Hand have this weird ability to resurrect dead people, and then those dead people, they almost instantly brainwash into being members of their groups. Several famous Marvel characters at one point or another have either been in charge of or a member of the Hand, and this includes Wolverine, Elektra, Daredevil, and Northstar.
Huh.
So, Jubilee actually manages to hold her own between her prior Olympic-level training, as well as just her trying to figure out her burgeoning power. She and Wolverine managed to keep up, and they made things loud. They actually blew up part of the Mandarin's castle during their escape.
Oops.
Except Jubilee was the one who blew up that part of the castle.
Yeah.
oh,
sorry,
by
not
her
sorry.
little self.
Yeah. Except these issues that we're talking about is also the introduction of the newest, or the most well-known version of Psylocke.
Really?
Yeah, this storyline is where you're shown the first time Quanon and Betsy Braddock have emerged into one individual.
Okay.
So, it's almost like one of those things that's hard to talk about, because the Mandarin was looking for a successor of some sort, somebody he could train. And when Psylocke was reintroduced, she was called Lady Mandarin. She had this weird battle armor on, and the Mandarin actually put his 10 rings on her fingers. She was supposed to be the tool by which he was going to rule.
Huh.
So, after they manage to escape, Jubilee stays with Wolverine on several of his missions through the world. I mean, as far as Wolverine knows, there is no X-Men. Psylocke isn't entirely sure what to do with herself, and Jubilee has nothing better to do. Unfortunately, because Jubilee has been a willful orphan most of her life, she's not very easy for Wolverine to train in anything. And no matter where they are in the world, she's basically just dying to have a cheeseburger and hang out at a mall. But every time the chips are down, you know, she is someone that they can relatively count on to assist. So, with Wolverine and Psylocke, Jubilee helped them fight a group called Hardcase and the Harriers, a group of mercenaries. And while that doesn't sound like an even fight, Hardcase and the Harriers were very shortly introduced in Marvel Comics, but they were able to hold their own versus this group of 3 mutants, right? It was actually the introduction of a fourth character to Wolverine's side, a human, that turned the tide in their favor. And I don't think I'll have to explain why one human can change an entire fight when I say that her name is Natasha Romanoff.
Yeah.
You know, when the Black Widow's on your side, unless you're dealing with something like, you know, that Iron Man is used to dealing with, you win.
True story.
And part of the missions that they were on were to rescue several kidnapped mutants from the island of Genosha. And it's at this point where Jubilee kind of figures out where her pecking order is in this group of, like, cobbled together superheroes when everybody else goes to fight, and Wolverine leaves her in charge of taking the Genosian prisoners and leading them to escape. Except, it does feel a little bit outsized when Jubilee is in charge of telling characters like Richter and Boom Boom what to do. If you're listening to this and don't understand why that's important, I mean, Richter has the power to control Earth, and at this point in his life, he can generally create earthquakes and seismic waves. Boom Boom creates energy plasmoids that explode after a given amount of time.
Seems like a larger scale version of her power.
Pretty much, yeah. But the three of them, Jubilee, Boom Boom, and Richter, managed to survive on the streets of the island nation before meeting up with the rest of the X-Men, who are on their own rescue mission at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But before they can really settle after the events of Genosha, the X-Men are pulled into deep space by the Shi'ar Empire.
Mm.
However, it's not the Shi'ar that are actually in charge of their own Imperium at this point. The group of X-Men is captured by War Scrolls, as they put it. And then the entire group of X-Men is briefly under... Well, not the group of X-Men, but Jubilee herself falls under the thrall of something she's not used to dealing with before. And that's Amal Farouk.
Is that...
Amal Farouk is the former human name of the entity known as the Shadow King.
Yep. That was
Okay.
it.
Yeah, I was searching my brain.
Amal Farouk was a telepath around the time Xavier was young, like pre-X-Men days. The two of them got into a fight on the astral plane. Unfortunately, Amal Farouk became unmoored from his body at this point, so he exists entirely as a psychic entity. And Farouk is one of those characters that probably could create a lot of damage in a lot of places if he wasn't so obsessed with getting back at Xavier.
Mm.
So the two of them end up at blows probably more often than they ought to. If Farouk just decided to F off and do something else, he'd probably run amok before anyone knew what happened. But I digress. So we've already covered that Jubilee's early career is filled with the kind of things that make Stranger Things look almost mundane. But it's at this point that the X-Men are reconstituted. The survivors of the Outback team, several people who have been gone for a while, plus X-Factor returning to the fold. And now you have this new era in the early 90s that a lot of people know as the Blue and Gold era. Jim Lee is the artist. Jubilee is one of the first members of the X-Men Blue, along with characters like Cyclops and Beast and Wolverine, Psylocke, Gambit, Rogue. A relatively strong team, but I mean, obviously, when you look at that lineup, Jubilee is not really in their class.
No.
And but everyone is accepting when Wolverine just kind of demands that this girl is good enough to be an X-Man. And due to the unusual relationship, everyone just looks at Jubilee as Wolverine's latest unofficial sidekick, like Kate Pryde used to be back in the day.
And we've mentioned it before. He has a way of adopting or finding or collecting orphan girls.
Yeah, and I'm not going to say their lives are better for it, but you got to admit, they do better than just about most characters named Robin.
Yeah. I mean, I would venture to say all.
They've
Are
been
they all
maimed.
still alive? Okay.
Yeah, they've been maimed, they've been hurt, they've been thought to be dead, but they haven't died
still
yet.
alive.
Yeah. They haven't
They're
actually
stronger
died.
for
But, I mean...
Oh, one of them did die. He got better?
I got better.
Well, Jubilee, in her first group of adventures officially as an X-Man, it's kind of a who's who of 90s enemies. She went up against characters like Omega Red, the Shi'ar Empire, the Skrulls, the Brood, Magneto. And she still managed to survive it all. Even among the Shi'ar, the Skrulls, and the Brood, she actually holds her own against other entities. She's often the one who notices civilians and manages to keep them safe during these periods. She also forges some unusually close relationships with different X-Men. She got regular piggyback rides from Beast. When Professor X regains use of his legs, she takes him rollerblading for the first time in his life. She talks with Wolverine a lot about Shadowcat, and she actually forms a friendship with a younger mutant who at this point is about 6 years old, named Illyana Rasputin.
Oh. I know that name.
Yeah, when Ilyana's human self died late in the era of the Legacy virus, she was one of the first mourners of this young girl, along with Jean Grey.
Mm-hmm.
So even though Jubilee's not a feature player, she's been a steady character and reliable character during this part of the X-Men's history. Okay? Along with the rest of the X-Men, Jubilee is also one of the characters captured by Omega Red, Matsuo Surayaba, and the Fenris twins.
That's new.
Fenris have been a long-time mutant enemies, but for some reason, even though they're mutants, you'll more often hear about them as agents of Hydra. They were Hydra commanders, more or less. How much do you know about the Fenris?
First I've heard of it.
The Fenris...
Only in passing.
Okay, the Fenris in the... God, what was the name of the X-Men series on Fox?
X-Men?
It wasn't X-Men, it was something else, I think.
No, it was a straight X-Men. Or
No, it had a word.
You know what? I've got them on my shelf. Let me go look.
Oh, you collected the DVDs?
Yes, I did. I was just rewatching them recently.
The Gifted. The Fenris were characters on Gifted, although they had different names and different abilities.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so the Fenris of the Gifted were way more impressive than the Fenris of comic books. The Fenris in comics were Andrea and Andreas Strucker, and yes, they are directly related to Baron Strucker.
Okay.
Except their powers don't work individually. When they clasp hands, they can create these high-level energy blasts, but only when they hold hands or when they're in physical contact with each other in some way. If they're separated, their powers don't work, period. Okay?
It was a little bit different in The Gifted.
Yeah, it was very different in The Gifted. They had individual abilities, and then they combined them, and it created something much more destructive.
Yep.
In the case of the comic books, I don't want to say they're useless individually. They're relatively good physical fighters. But, if you tell me that one of them is taking on Psylocke by themselves, well, good luck. You just lost a Fenris twin.
Yep.
But either way, yeah, the Fenris were part of the cabal that captured them. Jubilee also ended up fighting Sabretooth during this encounter. And somehow she didn't come out missing a limb.
Or dead.
Yeah. Then, later with Wolverine, she ended up face-to-face with Mojo, of all people.
Oh, we just talked about him.
Yeah, the person from the spineless dimension who rules his universe via television. And of all this, she's still relatively okay. Then she's arrested in Tokyo for driving without a license and speeding.
Rather mundane.
It is, except this is also how she ran across another longtime Wolverine ally, except somebody probably more dangerous than most of the others. And that character is named Yukio. Yukio is a figure in the Japanese underground. Think of her as like Jubilee, maybe 5 to 10 years older, happier, and enjoying being a pseudo-criminal. Not the person you want to influence a 16-year-old girl.
Okay.
All right. The two end up teaming up against a character named Celia Markham. I know that name for some reason, but I don't remember why. Also during this period, Jubilee aids the X-Men and the Ghost Rider up against an invasion of aliens called the Brood. The Brood were kind of Marvel Comics' version of xenomorphs.
Yeah.
They procreate by infecting people with an egg, and instead of it bursting through their chest, it transforms that character into Brood. Since the Brood have originally run into the X-Men are kind of a prize, because if they manage to transform one of them, they get a Brood with mutant abilities. The same abilities of the host body, whatever that is.
Yeah.
They've come close on several occasions to transforming an X-Man or two. Unfortunately, 90% of the time that's Wolverine, and his healing factor tends to just kind of devour whatever infection it gets.
It's been rejected.
Yeah, so his transformation is often very temporary. And Jubilee has also been to Mojo World and back. And if you want to talk about mind-bending experiences, I mean, a dystopia run entirely based on whoever has the highest ratings wins.
So, essentially, America?
America 2017, yeah.
Yeah.
Jubilee has also fallen halfway through a time portal and witnessed the moment that hitmen arrived at her home to kill her parents.
Ooh.
So but for the first time in her life, she actually knows the names and faces of her parents' murderers. And instead of trying to change time, because she only fell halfway through, she didn't end up back there. She saw it. So now, she wants to find them.
Ooh.
And one person stood in her way and talked her out of it.
Wolverine?
Yes.
Of course.
Okay. But how rude is it that he convinces her not to go on a murder spree, but not long after this, Wolverine leaves the X-Men to handle his own business and doesn't tell Jubilee.
He's always been a hypocrite in that
He is.
respect.
Yeah.
But he's trying to make sure no one's going to be like him. He knows he's an awful person.
Yeah, but he didn't even confront her about leaving. He left her a note that told her to stay with Professor Xavier and the X-Men and not go on her own again. And for some reason, she listens to this. A willful, determined girl who's been used to living on her own for most of her life, and somehow she didn't strike out on her own. The other X-Men note that she stays, willful and spunky, but she still seems somewhat down after Wolverine leaves.
Mm-hmm.
And Wolverine doesn't come back for a while, but during this time, the world is attacked by something known as the Phalanx. And if you've read comic books more recently, the original Phalanx were a bit more analog in how they worked. They're techno-organic beings that can infect other organic beings, make them techno-organic, and it forces them to join a hive mind of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
If you're familiar with Warlock is pretty much a underdeveloped or immature version of the Phalanx. Okay? And the Phalanx were after several characters, but they tend to, like the Brood, target mutants, not because they wanted the mutant abilities, but because they wanted the genomes to figure out how to circumvent mutant abilities. It's during this period, called the Phalanx Covenant, that several new characters are introduced, namely Husk, Sync, M, Skin, Chamber, Penance, Mondo, Gaia, and Blink. And it's thought that at the end of the Phalanx saga, the original group of Phalanx were all on one ship, and that Blink transported herself with the Phalanx out of the universe. That's how this whole thing was stopped. And for a long period, people thought Blink was just dead. They thought she shredded herself doing this. And technically, I think she did. But what happened afterwards was that all these young mutants were being led around by one well-known X-Man and one well-known X-Enemy. The X-Man's name is Sean Cassidy. He may be known to longtime comic book readers as the Banshee.
Mm-hmm.
The Enemy is a lady that just about everyone knows right now, and her name is Emma Frost, who at this point has never been an X-Man, but she's been well known to handle several schools of mutants, and she generally creates teams out of them known as the Hellions.
Yeah.
Somehow Banshee convinces Frost to help him train this new group of mutants, who obviously need teachers and need mentors. And because Jubilee is so immature, the X-Men decide that she should be on this new squad. She does not handle this very well. I mean, granted, she's with a bunch of people her own age, finally, but when you've been an X-Man for probably at this point about 4 years of real-world time, you're suddenly told that you're on the training squad, I'd take that personally, too.
Yeah.
But this group of mutants is the first one known as Generation X. During this period, they not only are these kids in training, but they also do the occasional mission to rescue young mutants. This includes like long-term X-Factor wards Artie Maddox and Leech. And for a period of time when a lot of superheroes were thought to be dead in the Marvel Universe, this included Franklin Richards. So, Banshee and Frost take it upon themselves to educate the members of Generation X, including Jubilee, as to how to use their abilities. And it's during this period that Jubilee's abilities kind of grow exponentially. Okay? Generation X takes on some pretty high-level foes, including Omega Red, the Juggernaut, and a newer villain introduced in Generation X known as M-Plate, one of M's relatives. And because of Jubilee's experience with the X-Men, she tends to outclass her other teammates pretty quickly. She's actually had battlefield tactics learned in the field. The others may be more powerful than she is, but they don't have that.
Experience goes a long way.
Yeah, Jubilee herself was almost solely responsible for the first defeat of M-Plate. See, what happened was M-Plate cannot exist without other mutants' energies. That's how he survives. And the funny thing was, Jubilee actually jumped in front of M-Plate and forced him to siphon off her energies, which temporarily gives him the powers of the people he takes the energies from. And she managed, because of how wild her powers can be if you don't know how to use it, M-Plate more or less blasted himself in the face with it. So, not only that, but Jubilee had enough of her own powers left in reserve that she let loose an explosion she was at Ground Zero at, and she basically destroyed the training grounds of Generation X, known as Proud Star Hall. You know, everybody survived the explosion because Iceman covered them with a shield. But that was probably the first time Jubilee's powers were shown to do more than irritate. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, Generation X and Jubilee are moved to the Massachusetts Academy. It's one of Emma Frost's first training facilities for her own students before she was ever associated with the X-Man. It's also during this period that something called Operation Zero Tolerance was happening. Do any of you know what that was?
No.
Was that the precursor to the Registration Act?
No, it's well after the proposed Registration Act.
Okay.
The thing is, Zero Tolerance was a government-sponsored anti-mutant operation. It was basically full of mutant hunting, capturing, and killing technology, and it was all led by a man named Bastion. During the early part of this, Bastion kidnapped Jubilee. I mean, she's a high-level Generation X member, a former X-Man. She's a perfect person to test a lot of their gear on. And she manages to resist a lot of the mental probes they send into her head. For a large amount of time, she hid valuable information about the X-Men. She managed to escape on her own early on and knocked out a lot of soldiers with a large volley of her own powers. But she stopped when she's recaptured because she overdid it on one of the guards and stopped to perform CPR and saved his life.
Yeah.
Eventually, Bastion's assistant, Daria, helped her escape. And while wandering the desert after a getaway, she's attacked by a Prime Sentinel. Now, a Prime Sentinel is a relatively new piece of tech. Y'all know what a Sentinel is?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, a Prime Sentinel was first introduced during Operation Zero Tolerance. This was their primary weapon against mutants. A Prime Sentinel is a human infected with a nanotech virus that transforms them into a person-sized Sentinel.
Oh.
You know, updated technology. The transformation is semi-permanent. You know, it would take a lot of surgery to remove the tech as well as restore someone to human. But this is why Operation Zero Tolerance was dangerous, because anybody infected with this virus could become a Sentinel. It's because of this virus that Karima Shandapar exists. Remember, she's known as Omega Sentinel? We saw her in Dawn of X.
Oh, okay.
This is how she was created. She was one of a
Gotcha.
few people who was infected with this nanovirus, but managed to retain her human mind. Alright, again, we got into a big aside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Jubilee's one of the first people attacked by a Prime Sentinel, and she managed to get away with it because she used her powers directly on the visual receptors of the Prime Sentinel. And then she saved at the last minute because it's at this point that Wolverine re-enters her life. Not only that, Jubilee is taken off Generation X and re-promoted back to the X-Men. And they had to return relatively quickly because another thing that Bastion managed to do without telling anybody was put a nanobomb inside Cyclops' skull.
Huh.
Yeah. Okay, here's the worst part. The re-promotion of the X-Men was extremely temporary because once they solved all that, they dropped her back off at the Massachusetts Academy.
Oh.
Yeah. But while this era of Generation X is going on, Jubilee learns that the true killer of her parents was a man named Hunter Braun. And she, because of her long training and long experience and her mutant abilities, she manages to track down Braun. And with the help of Generation X, she beat him. It's at this point that while she's confronting Braun about what she did, her emotions got the better of her, and her powers flared to a massive level. Now, when I say massive, yes, she confronted him. Yes, there was an explosion. She did not kill Braun, but somehow she redirected the explosion and blew up the warehouse they were standing in.
Ooh.
There's some restraint right there.
Yeah, she left him unconscious, and he was arrested by local authorities.
Mm-hmm.
Not long after this Generation X disbands, the series is discontinued in Marvel Comics, and she moved in with another Generation X member, Skin, to a Hollywood apartment. She wanted a career in acting.
Mm-hmm.
But being a Chinese American, the only roles she can get are stereotypical Asian American roles.
Yeah.
And then she had another setback when her agent tried to seduce her.
Oh. Typical.
His office suddenly blew up?
Oops. Wonder how that happened.
Yeah. So, after this, in one of those non-starring roles, Jubilee is offered a role with Banshee's new militaristic crew of X-Corps. I don't quite know how X-Corps was started. It's one of those things where it is a more militaristic, very much in-your-face type of organizations. And while that seems to fit with Jubilee's attitude, it doesn't seem to fit with her training, nor do I know how X-Corps was ever funded. But she was on X-Corps with Husk and M, two other former Generation X members. And they didn't join to really be a part of X-Corps. They joined because they thought Banshee might be a little bit out of his mind and they wanted to keep an eye on him.
Yeah.
During her time with X-Corps, Jubilee manages to stave off an uprising in Paris by blinding hostiles. And then Jubilee and Husk, with the help of a short-term X-Men at the time known as Stacy X, managed to take down the Blob and rescue Banshee from Mystique. I take it you don't know who Stacy X is.
No.
She was an X-Man for maybe 12 issues. She was a former prostitute.
Oh.
She was part of a group of mutant prostitutes, just people who had that kink of wanting to be with a mutant. And she had snake-like skin. It was scaled skin, but it was peach and tan-toned.
Mm-hmm.
But her actual mutant ability was pheromonal control.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It was one of those characters that never really caught on with fans. I was one of those people who read that, saw all the possibilities, and was disappointed they never really delved into what she could mean to anything.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, after X-Corps broke down, Jubilee went back to Los Angeles to living with Skin. But this is where things got kind of deep, because she and a few other young mutants, including Magma, who wasn't a member of any X-Team at that time, suddenly reappeared on the lawn of the Xavier Institute, crucified into the ground.
Oh.
Ooh.
Oh, no, it wasn't into the ground. They were on crosses. Sorry. This was done by not a new group, but a more hostile version of the Church of Humanity. One of those religious right things that believes that mutants are an affront to God, therefore must be destroyed. It was during this period that Angel had that weird healing blood ability. So everybody there got... Sorry?
Say convenient.
Yeah, everybody there got transfusions and survived, with the exception of Skin. Skin passed away at that point.
Too far gone, I guess.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this was one of Jubilee's best friends, and she dropped into a depression.
Right.
She reunited at this point with Husk. It's been a while since she'd seen her. And, those two, along with Angel, attended Skin's funeral, but because the Gravekeeper would not allow a mutant to be interred in his cemetery, they have to have Skin cremated, and somehow Skin's ashes didn't end up with his family. They ended up in Jubilee's hands. She had the urn. So after this, the X-Men re-accept Jubilee for a while, and she goes on a few missions with Nightcrawler and Havoc's team. But she's taken off the active roster by Cyclops, who determines that her depression is getting the better of her. So
Wouldn't going on missions be better for her? Stay active?
I don't know. That's high stress, and she might take out her depression on the wrong target.
Yeah.
And you're dealing with a character that creates explosions.
I mean, I'm not saying it's a perfect solution, but, stewing alone at home after the death of your best friend, kind of not the best place to be.
Well, it's not like she wasn't kicked off the complex. She was just taken off active duty. She was still around the other X-Men at this point. But instead of sticking around, she's contacted by a long-lost relative. She has an aunt named Hope. Hope adopts Jubilee and takes her into her home in Los Angeles. So Jubilee has, for the first time in her, her young life, an actual break from the mutant gallivanting lifestyle. Jubilee is enrolled in Peyton Noble High School and becomes a peer advisor of all things.
Interesting.
She gets into a few fights at school and is reprimanded because she displays her powers a couple times. She also makes a friend out of a mutant named Shane Shooter and helps him depose a gang leader.
Nice.
Unfortunately, something Jubilee did not know about when she was adopted was that Hope is actually part of a crime ring.
Oh.
No. She's not a B&E specialist. She doesn't steal cars. As it turns out, Hope is an assassin.
Is that related to how her parents died?
Well, according to the synopsis, while Wolverine is visiting Jubilee, he and Jubilee, along with Hope and Hope's butler, I did not know this was this type of family, they got into a fight with Hope's former boss.
Uh-oh.
Hope is caught in an explosion and is seemingly dies to everyone present, except nobody knows that she's thrown clear of the explosion. And when she gets up, you notice that Hope has several cybernetic parts.
Uh-oh.
Unfortunately, the storyline is never followed up on, because at this point, Jubilee moves back to the X-Mansion with Wolverine.
What?
Yeah, nobody knows what came of Hope after this point.
Why don't they just, read it now?
Unfortunately, I think it's one of those cases where you have to convince people to read Jubilee, and as we've discussed, this is not a popular character as far as fandoms.
She's one of my favorites.
That's
okay,
you,
maybe not popular opinion, but yeah, I'm sure there's others out there.
They have to convince other people to buy the comic. I mean, I'm a fan of Bishop, and I consider him to be more niche. It's just I'm surprised how many people speak up when Bishop is featured somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
I like Bishop.
Okay, so we've covered that Jubilee is back at the X-Mansion, but she may not be an X-Man. And it's very unlikely that's going to change soon, because after this is an event known as the Decimation.
Mm.
This is when the Scarlet Witch utters pretty famous words in Marvel history, "No more mutants." She uses her reality-warping powers and pretty much takes away the powers of all mutants in the world, save approximately 600. Okay? There's a popular number thrown around that there's 198 mutants left, so they call themselves the 198, but it's really thought to be more than that. These are just the 198 somewhere in the X-Men's orbit. Unfortunately, Jubilee is not one of those characters. Her powers disappear with the decimation. So, she returns to New York after running a halfway house for depowered mutants in Queens, and she's kidnapped by Omega Red. At this point, they might as well have each other's Instagrams.
Right.
Yeah. Omega Red and his henchmen have Jubilee while Wolverine is sidetracked during the battle, and she's taken to Berlin as a hostage. Wolverine actually needs S.H.I.E.L.D.'s help to find where they've taken Jubilee, but by this point she's already beaten and badly injured, and Wolverine trades himself via S.H.I.E.L.D. for Jubilee's safety. And S.H.I.E.L.D. is allowed to take away Jubilee while Wolverine becomes Omega Red's captor. She's not seen for a while after this point. As a matter of fact, Jubilee resurfaces a little while later in probably one of the most unexpected places I'm aware of. She becomes a new warrior.
Huh.
And no, I don't mean a standard new warrior. When I mention that name, a lot of the places people immediately go is like, Justice or Nova or Namorita, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a new version of the New Warriors, and it's entirely populated by characters with stolen technology. I mean, there's characters that have technology stolen from Stark Industries, the Stilt Man, all kinds of just offbeat places from the Marvel Universe.
Mm-hmm.
But they're being led by a character named Wondra, Wondra. Wondra is the name Jubilee's going under during this period.
Huh.
She is the second in command of the New Warriors, who is being led by a new Night Thrasher, the original's brother. Her suit as Wondra gives her super strength, supplied by what appears to be a bastardization of the Wizard's Wonder Gauntlets that control gravity.
Okay.
And she's pretty much field leader at this point. Other former mutants who are on this team include Decibel and Stacy X. They distrust Night Thrasher, and they uncover that he is using the team for less than noble reasons. And after a trip to the future, all former mutants on the team leave in the hands of former members of the Initiative. Oh no, they leave the team in the hands of former members of the Initiative, so the New Warriors becomes a superpowered team again, but it has some really unusual members, like Justice, Ultra Girl, and Slapstick. Jubilee goes to San Francisco and meets up with a group of young mutants her age, who talk to her about this new island nation for mutants called Utopia. And despite being a technical mutant who lost her powers, Jubilee decides not to join the X-Men at this point. While the X-Men are in Utopia in the San Francisco Bay, he sends Pixie to check on her, and while they're chatting, Jubilee and Pixie are attacked by a suicide bomber. Have either of you read this period? Because this is where things change a lot.
No, I've not heard any of that.
Okay, the suicide bomber, not only does he explode, but he's infected with a bioengineered virus.
Oh.
And the suicide bomber is a vampire.
Oh.
So Jubilee is close to this explosion. And she's taken to the X-Men headquarters where they run tests on her, and the biovirus was made to create new vampires.
Whoa.
So Jubilee is slowly being transformed into one. She's less and less able to handle sunlight as the days go by, and most of the others infected by the virus quickly change. Pixie herself was on the periphery of the blast and not infected, but they guess because of Jubilee's former, because of her mutant DNA, even though she's not powered, her DNA is handling the virus a little differently than the rest of the humans that were infected. The problem is, the further her transformation goes, the more she starts to talk about the will of something called the Lord of Vampires. So, one of the X-Men's physicians at this point, Dr. Nemesis, Jubilee talks to him and says that something is calling to her. And, of course, Nemesis tells her to fight it. Eventually, Jubilee's will gives out and she doesn't want to fight. The X-Men, meanwhile, are still trying to figure out who the new Lord of Vampires is because they find out Dracula has been killed. Another physician employed by the X-Men at this point, the creator of the Hope Cure, Kavita Rao, checks on Jubilee, but she's attacked at this point. Jubilee's vampirism is pretty close to complete, and Wolverine allows Jubilee to take some of his blood since his healing factor stops her from going full-on bloodsucker. And it's at this point that things get a little awkward because it turns out one of the younger X-Men actually has a crush on Jubilee. It's not one
How much younger, though?
It's not it's not the age that's the problem, it's the physicality. This X-Man technically doesn't have his own body.
What?
You ever heard of a guy named Rockslide?
Huh.
Rockslide's a heavy hitter, but he technically doesn't have a body of his own. He makes body out of ambient materials.
Oh, that could be awkward.
Yeah. Did you know that in his original form, Rockslide can actually break off sections of himself and they can act independently, which is fine. One of the things they discovered, though, is that because Rockslide is technically a psychokinetic energy manipulating other objects, is that he can forcibly explode his bodies.
Huh.
He's actually been able to remake himself in several ways. That's why he's transformed 2 or 3 times since he's been introduced. And at one point, one of the most powerful forms he ever had was when he exploded his body and remade it while he was in the dimension of Limbo, Magic's home country.
Oh,
He had a body entirely made by Limbo lava rock.
What?
neat.
Yeah, he was dangerous during that period, really dangerous.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're getting an aside again. Rockslide actually follows Wolverine because at this point, Jubilee's already escaped to get to the Lord of Vampires. So you have Wolverine and Rockslide trying to follow her to wherever they go. Jubilee leaves Utopia and manages to meet up with the current Lord of Vampires, characters known as Xarius. And Xarius feeds on Jubilee. Finishes her transformation. The sick part is Jubilee was not the target of all this.
Who was it?
They forcibly infected Jubilee. That was part of the plan. But it's not Jubilee who they wanted. They wanted who was following her.
Wolverine?
Yes.
Of
Ooh.
course. Always back to Wolverine.
She was the bait in a trap to capture Wolverine, who is beset upon by vampires and bitten so hard and frequently, he transforms. So now these vampires have both Wolverine and Jubilee, right? During the night, they attack Utopia. And this is where Cyclops' mad genius phase really started, in my opinion. Because Xarius, of course, will not attack the island directly. He's pretty much taunting Cyclops the entire time, while vampires led by, a depowered Jubilee and a vampiric Wolverine are all over the place. Okay? The X-Men are doing their best. They send anybody who doesn't have a normal physical body to the front lines. So it's Emma Frost in Diamond form, Cyclops, Iceman, and they're holding their own, but they're having trouble pushing this back. And of course, they don't. Everybody has trouble trying to stop a vampire Wolverine.
Yeah.
So while
That would be difficult.
Yeah, so while Zarius is yelling at Cyclops via video screen, Wolverine busts into Cyclops' command center. And this is where Cyclops shows just how far-thinking he is, because he holds up a triggering device of some sort. And he tells Zarius basically, didn't you think it was interesting, or at least unusual, how quickly you overwhelmed somebody with such a forceful healing factor? Do you realize that we inoculated him before we sent him to your island after Jubilee? Did you realize that inoculation had a nanovirus in it that was deadening his healing factor? And did you know that I could turn those off right now? And he hit the plunger.
Oh.
And Wolverine transformed back to himself. He was upset with Cyclops for manipulating him. He swore that they were going to have a conversation, and he pointed the screen as soon as he cuts off that guy's head.
I was kind of wondering, like, how could they turn Wolverine?
Well, that's the reason why Cyclops let him go. Not because he was counting on Wolverine being transformed, but the thing is, Wolverine now knows exactly where the vampires are hiding. Unfortunately, there is no way to change back Jubilee such a way. They do manage to defeat Zarius now that Wolverine is on a, pretty much a blood feud with this head vampire. But once Zarius is gone, that leaves a fully transformed Jubilee who now has to take regular vials of Wolverine's blood just to stand any form of sunlight. This is a long period where Jubilee is a vampire, or at least the beginning of it.
I've never even heard that she turned vampire.
Yeah.
I heard she turned vampire. I just don't know when or how.
Yeah. I mean, Cyclops and Wolverine both rejected Blade's suggestion. Blade just said you should kill her now and save her the trouble.
Well, Blade doesn't get a say in it.
Well, he's
half-blood.
He's a vampire specialist. I mean, he's who you ask.
And he takes the expedient solution.
Yeah, but I mean, this is another case where Jubilee's life has been turned upside down again, and she's dealing with depression. So at Gambit's direction, Wolverine goes to Paris on a mission and takes this newly vampiric Jubilee with him. The funny thing is, they don't go alone, and I don't know why Gambit pushes this particular point. This is also one of the first times that Laura Kinney has a mission as an X-Man.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
You know who that name is, right?
I do.
Yeah, that's X-23.
Mm-hmm.
So, think about it this way. The mutant that Wolverine is trying to train right now meets the former mutant, now vampire, who already has a beef, multiple abandonment issues, and is staring at her replacement in the face. Does any of this sound intelligent?
Awkward.
For some reason, Gambit's idea is, you take Jubilee, I'll take X-23, and we'll settle this whole thing.
I think Gambit's woefully outclassed.
Yeah. Well, Gambit ends up pulling Wolverine aside mid-mission and talks to Wolverine about the difference in how he treats Jubilee and X-23, both of whom are looking up to this demented Canadian as a father figure of some sort. But the worst possible thing happens. During this mission, X-23 and Jubilee become friends because they see their similar circumstances.
Oh, no!
Yeah.
Yep.
So, Jubilee will help X-23 with her compulsions to kill half the enemies she comes across, and also help Laura learn how to be a normal girl. In trade, X-23 will show Jubilee a few extra tricks on how to kill said people.
Sure, why not? No powers, got vampirism going on? Let's go!
Yeah, nightmare scenario.
Obviously.
Not long after this, Jubilee is taken in by another group of vampires who have broken away from the main hosts of them and are pretty much self-styled vampire hunters called the Forgiven. They figured out how to move on beyond their need for bloods and can move about in... And they want to know more about Jubilee, who doesn't seem to need blood on a regular basis and moves around during the day. So, fast forward, we're in the Marvel Now era, where a lot of characters are redefined. Jubilee is returned to the X-Men, and for some reason she has a baby in tow.
How?
She found this baby, apparently after the parents died. It's a young Japanese baby named Shogo. What they didn't know is that Shogo is infected with something called Archaea. This is one of those things that's going to require its own explanation. Do you know the X-Men enemy known as Sublime?
No.
Okay.
No.
Sublime is the group name of an alien biological virus. It's self-aware, and it can infect humans and pretty much work them like puppets. The problem is that Sublime discovers while it can move freely from human to human, and it's not a case of each human it infects is a new version of Sublime. It is its own like biological virus that moves from person to person. Each new person is its sole host. What it discovers, though, is that due to mutants' unusual biologies, it can't infect mutants, period.
Weird.
So
It's just a carrier then.
yeah, it pretty much determines that it has to eradicate mutants if it has any hope of being able to move freely amongst humanity. And as you can imagine, since we're dealing with the X-Men now, those plans have not gone well.
Yeah.
Eventually, Sublime just kind of resolves itself to exist on the planet and just stop dealing with mutants. Now, remember I said Shogo was infected with something called Archaea. Archaea is Sublime's, air quotes, sister. Except Archaea does not infect biological things. It infects technological things.
Okay.
So that indicates that something about Shogo is cybernetic. Archaea has created its own body out of nanoviruses, but part of the time that it managed to first exist on Earth, it infected Lady Deathstrike.
Oh, okay.
Oh no.
Yeah, did not take that well. But, I mean, still, that tells you what Archaea can do. So this made a mutual enemy for both the first, like, all-female team of X-Men and Sublime. I'm not going to get deeper into that, because that could be its own thing.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, now that Jubilee has pseudo-adopted this baby, not in any legal means, mind you, she just is taking care of it, is also the Battle of the Atom event. The original X-Men from the Time Lost universe have come forward, and a new group of, like, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants are attacking them. Except some of the X-Men travel forward into the time where these new Brotherhood are from, and they meet the X-Men of this period. These X-Men are being led by Wolverine.
Of course.
No, not of course. This Wolverine's original name is Jubilation Lee.
What?
Oh.
She has somehow adapted fully to her life as a vampire. She has a Wolverine-style armor, laser claws, but she is the field leader. She's the leader of the X-Men.
Okay.
And on this team is another character named Sentinel X, who looks like somebody wearing Tony Stark armor styled after Sentinels. That character's name is Shogo Lee, a fully adult version of the baby she's taking care of.
Huh.
So the current time version of Jubilee learned something about herself before her future self died as part of this event. She also learns about some of the struggles that Shogo went through, because Shogo actually adapted parts of his armor to form sunshades just so the mother he's grown up with is more comfortable during the daytime. You know, she spends quality time and learns that she actually did a fair job trying to help raise this young baby that she still is getting to know in large degrees. But after this event, Storm also informs Jubilee that the X-Men have taken extra steps to file formal adoption papers on her behalf for Shogo.
Aw.
Sure, why not?
So fast forward a bit further, we have the Jean Grey School that is now based in Central Park. We have the latest version of Generation X, which is a bunch of mutants that the X-Men at this point, and this is not the Cyclops version, so you can't tell me it's his fault. This is like the Wolverine Shadowcat period. Okay? But they determined that a group of mutants are not exactly combat ready. Be that because of certain powers like Nature Girls who are not overly offensive, or because their attitudes are just plain sour, like a certain character named Quentin Quire. But they've put Jubilee in charge of this group of just non-combat ready mutants. The series did not sell terribly well, so it ended after 12 issues, but it ended on an unusually touching way, because it turns out at this point, Quentin Quire had been living with a section of the Phoenix Force within his person for a while. And Quire, in an unusual moment of empathy, gave up that section of the Phoenix Force to heal Jubilee.
Oh, interesting.
The vampire biology is ripped from her system, and because of the Phoenix's ability of rebirth, her mutant powers are restored.
Of course.
Jubilee is herself for the first time in like 10 years of comic book time.
Dang.
Now, he would never say he did that for the nicest reasons, and if anyone ever asked him, he'd probably say it was the funniest joke he ever pulled off.
Yeah, of course.
but he did it. So Jubilee is back, and this is the last time Jubilee is seen before the dawn of X period. So
Wow.
when I was researching all this, to me, Jubilee is a lot like Angel. You know, if you take it at face value, she doesn't seem that important. But when you combine her entire history, how are you still speaking coherently?
Yeah, seriously.
You know, and at this point, when I said that she and Omega Red might as well trade Instagrams, I freaking mean it. For some reason, their histories are just really intertwined. Probably because of Wolverine, but at the same time, she's always the target. I still don't quite understand why so many people are down on this character. I understand that her creation didn't seem to be thought in terms of power. She was just kind of this new Robin-esque character that was meant to pull Wolverine out of his murderous funks all the time. I get that. However, in her Generation X forms, she's been shown as being able to devastate buildings just because she loses control of her abilities. She's creating energy grenades, more or less. The only difference is the intensity.
Yeah.
I mean, I think most of the hate for her is like, and they're and again, first impressions go a long way. It's like she's always be the one being captured or always the one causing the problems for the X-Men.
Mm-hmm.
People tend to hate characters that kind of do that in franchises. So she's never got out of that stigma.
It could very well be. It's one of those cases where I just kind of hope people would get over it, and instead of just bringing in prejudices, just sit down, read it, and see the character based on the weird transformations they make. I mean, we're talking about someone who went from mutant to depowered to vampire and back again.
That's
And also
quite a journey.
Yes.
And also, I think in the era of the '90s, being kind and empathetic was kind of not well looked upon, I guess.
Maybe. I mean, the character is now one of the founding members of the newest version of Excalibur, the one with Apocalypse, Rogue, Gambit, being led by the new Captain Britain. And I'm just hoping that she's going to be treated as something more than either the pep talker or the comic relief, because she has the capability to create widespread devastation without quite as much trouble as, say, Boom Boom does. You know, and I know her powers look pretty, but that's only because it's the equivalent of turning your stereo down from a scale of 1 to 10 down to maybe 1/2.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when she turns it up, I mean, obviously she can really cause some serious damage. She just tends not to because she's, as we've heard about with the guard she saved by CPR, she's incredibly empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't want to create pain, she just happens to be one of those characters who's well suited to do so.
I'm kind of wondering if we have actually seen the upper levels of her powers.
I've seen them visually in some of the issues of Generation X I flipped through. I was not a big collector of it when it came out. But you know how her powers usually come out in these small streams of vibrant color, right?
Yeah.
I saw an image of her in a Generation X costume, and she had 3 gigantic energy plasmoids, 1 green, 1 blue, 1 orange, floating around her, and each of them looked to be like twice the size of a football. Now, if you consider that her average powers seem to be these like small specks of her ability, scale that up to what was floating around her.
Again, that seems pretty potent, but
Yes, and I was digging into her abilities. Did you know that she can work her powers in reverse?
she
See
can.
what?
Any of her energy plasmoids that she has created and she has not exploded yet, she can actually reabsorb those.
Interesting.
Wow. I wonder how that affects her.
It doesn't seem to be negative at all, but think about the potential for her when it comes to not just energy generation, but energy absorption. If she can figure out how to do that in reverse and pull in more types of like different energies, either be it emanated or kinetic, she could actually create quite a bit of a buffer zone between herself and somebody else.
Yeah.
Or really go toe-to with someone that's truly powerful, like maybe
Exactly.
Cyclops.
Yeah, and as I've said, if she can have those plasmoids floating around her, that means she can control not just the size of what she creates, but when it explodes. She can actually hold them in that state.
She's already outclassing Boom Boom.
Potentially. Boom Boom is... Jubilee's powers are more utilitarian. You know, she can either turn them on or off, she can threaten somebody and pull it back. Boom Boom's is all offense. If she creates them, it's going to explode.
Yeah.
And the other thing that was discovered is that Boom Boom, she doesn't just create energy plasmoid. She can create streams of it, which can stick to something like napalm.
Dang.
So think of it as this jelly. You know, that could be super hot or benign depending on how she fires it. But either way, when it touches, it's going to explode. It's just a matter of when it's going to. She can't recall it. It's just going to happen.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Jubilee's powers are also way more precise. She can project one of these plasmoids inside someone's body and then blow it up.
I heard tale of her projecting in down the barrel of a gun.
She did it once in one of the alt-world tales. One of her more extreme versions did it inside a human brain.
Ooh.
Whoa.
But she didn't do it to the point of devastation. It was with enough subtlety that she managed to mimic the effects of a massive stroke.
Ooh.
That is some serious accuracy.
That is a serious precision, actually.
While during the Generation X era, when Emma Frost was trying to understand Jubilee's powers, she described it as an untapped ability to, quote, detonate matter at a subatomic level, unquote.
Ooh.
So her powers, if necessary, can actually break the bonds between atoms and create nuclear fission.
That's
That's
would be
terrifying.
next
actually.
level. Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically like Gambit's powers, but way more subtle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As well as potentially way more powerful.
Nice.
Because we're not just talking about exploding energy plasmoids, we're talking about being able to detonate matter.
Yeah.
I think this is unfortunately one of those unusual things that happens when you switch writers. Maybe somebody came up with something really nifty, and then the next person down the pipe may not have read all the fine details and accidentally ignored it.
That sucks. I kind of wish people would not be assigned to a character, but that there would be somebody overseeing the overall plot so that whoever was writing would keep in mind the storyline, because it wouldn't bounce back and forth. It wouldn't be retconned the next episode or issue.
Mhm.
You know, to keep things coherent.
Yeah, and something else that Emma said during the Generation X period really stuck with me. It was early on when they were still trying to lay out what Jubilee's powers and abilities would be for this series. And mind you, this is Emma Frost who said this, so if she says it very plainly, you can take it to the bank.
Mm-hmm.
She said that Jubilee had unlimited potential and was one of the most powerful mutants she had ever encountered. Now, mind you, this isn't just
Whoa.
Emma Frost, professional supervillain. This is Emma Frost, trainer of young mutants. Experienced trainer of young mutants.
Very strong mutants.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Doesn't she have the ability to unlock untapped potential?
No, that's Sage.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Sage very much has that. Well, she displayed that ability once in Generation X. She is very. I think she may have used it once or twice since then. It's another one of those things that I can't tell if it's writer's convenience or if somebody forgot that Sage has an extra ability.
Mm-hmm.
So, between the ability for her to reabsorb these plasmoids as well as to be able to control where these things float around her once she projects them, before she explodes them, she really could have a lot of unusual storytelling potential if somebody just kind of exercised their imagination with this character.
Really?
Goodness knows what she could create with an imaginative writer, and I'm really hoping that in Excalibur, somebody gives her a bit more of a spotlight. I mean, goodness
I'm
knows.
hoping that somebody taps into the potential for her storyline.
Well, at least she finally has the first costume that doesn't make her look like a Robin ripoff.
Yeah.
You've
That's
read the
now.
issues. I'm sorry?
What's her costume look like now?
She's still wearing the yellow long coat, but instead of wearing like just, a pair of plain shorts and a red shirt, she's wearing like this black bodysuit, but the top part of it is like bright pink with an X symbol on it, and it comes down to sort of a point towards the navel.
Yeah, it's pretty cool looking.
It's like somebody took her original costume and concept and just did a serious update. I'm sorry. Let me pull up a quick image here because I don't want to leave you on that marker. I know we've recorded a little bit longer than I expected, but at the same time, I just don't want to leave this flat there. I want to answer all questions about this character before we go. So,
Yeah, no, it sounds like with the extent of her abilities, and again, with a little bit of imagination, she could really stand out and still be as empathetic as her history has set her out to be.
I think
It's like
so.
she has this huge potential to be a dangerous force, and she chooses not to.
Yeah, there's a lot of storytelling upside to this character, and she's already survived quite a bit. But one of the things she's lacking is a fully fleshed out origin. It seems like a few people have tried, but it's never stuck. And if they would just work on her power set a bit more, she could She could not just be a strong player in the comic book. She could be one of those utilitarian characters that would work for like live action media. And not only that, I mean, Disney is always looking to expand their diversity portfolio, and a Chinese American character with massive amounts of power is very screen friendly and simple, doesn't require a lot of makeup to create the character visually. I think it's something they would be looking for. But you can see the image there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it is like her original look updated. She's still wearing the visor sunglasses. She's wearing more or less a pink one piece with a black under... Yeah, over a black one piece, or a black bodysuit, I should say, and her pretty much trademark yellow coat at this point.
Yeah, she's never going to get away from that.
No, I don't think there really is a way to. That's pretty much a synonymous sign of the character. So, do you guys feel like you learned something today?
Yeah, a lot.
I feel like there's some untapped potential.
Vampire Jubilee? Really?
You really didn't know that? That was one of the things she was really well known for so long.
I guess for a while I'd gotten out of the X-Men and comic books in general for a while. I don't know.
The sad part is that was the only time I really didn't like the character, and I know it was just kind of storytelling and everything, but I don't know. Before I even knew what all of her abilities could really do, I just felt like they were hamstringing this character. You know, she went from being the spunky fireworks generator to the vampire. I didn't know what to do with it. It could have been if they stuck with her. I mean, based on what I've told you, it really sounds like a few writers tried, but as soon as they tried, she was just shuttled off to another story or off into limbo.
Yeah.
I will be honest, in her new book with everyone and Apocalypse, I feel like there's a groundwork for her powers to be further explored.
There is the groundwork, and Apocalypse is arguably one of the guys to bring out weirdly hidden potential nobody sees. I won't argue that. I mean, he's done it with his Horsemen throughout his introduction since the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, though, it also occurs to me that out of this entire team, Jubilee is probably the most normal among them somehow.
Yeah. Somehow.
You know, Gambit and Rogue, the unusual odd couple, and the King of Thieves there. Betsy Braddock, who's shifted bodies twice and is now the avatar of all of Great Britain. Richter, who's having a few mental troubles but is the master of Earth. Apocalypse is Apocalypse. And here among them you have Jubilee, who can create really bright explosions and is a single mom.
I really hope they don't relegate her to this being the moral compass or center and give her a little bit more than that.
I'm not saying moral compass, but she's probably the most grounded person on Excalibur at this point. She's definitely the only one with like a whole lot of real-world, real-life experience anymore. So she could be the person that actually keeps his team from getting too far involved in their weird mystical adventures. A strange statement, I know, but there it is. All right. I think we've talked enough on this particular subject.
Yeah.
I had an idea as to what to talk about next, and it's one of those things where I'm not going to force you to read it, but I'll do my best to summarize it with you guys, because I haven't read it either.
What's that?
Well, it occurred to me after talking so long about Scalp Hunter and Angel during the period of the fall of the Mutant Massacre. I've never actually read the Mutant Massacre. I know the basics of what it is, but I mean, that created such a serious cost. During the X-Men's history, I would like to know more about what happened there. To give an example, Angel was not the only one maimed during the fall of the mutants. Nightcrawler and Shadowcat suffered such serious injuries, they were shipped off to England to heal. Oh, no, not England, Muir Isle. They were shipped to Muir Isle to heal. And after the Mutant Massacre was the fall of the mutants, where everyone thought the X-Men was dead, and Nightcrawler and Shadowcat thought all the people they knew were gone, and this is how they ended up on Excalibur for a while. They thought the X-Men were just a gone entity. So it occurs to me that the Mutant Massacre is probably something we should cover, because it does change the course of a lot of characters and teams.
That sounds good.
All right.
Sure.
So next week we will cover an X-Men benchmark. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed yourself, and I hope you've learned something about a character you might not have known too well before. Next week it'll be the Mutant Massacre. Thanks for tuning in. I am Jeremy.
And I'm Joanna.
And I'm Justin.
And you've just been excellently informed.
I just did deal with it.